Over last 2 days, I think you guys have heard about the prospectus of Indian economy being very bright from various speakers on this forum. A while back, Manish and Sanjeev, they gave us an opportunity to peep into how policymakers are thinking incrementally and to take India ahead over medium to long term. Over next 20 to 25 minutes, I would be sharing our take on likely impact of these measures on macroeconomic variables and our outlook on the fixed income. But before we start, let me just remind you that calendar year 2020 will not only be remembered as the year of COVID disruption, but also as the year when policymakers did unleash large coordinated fiscal, monetary, and medical response to our crisis. Let me start with a brief global take. At the start of fiscal year 2021, when the COVID hit us, it seemed that it will leave us with a large and widespread dent on the economy. Global GDP was expected to degrow by about 6 to 6.5%, and about 85% of the economy were expected to enter into recession. Thankfully, due to the learnings of 2008, policymakers were forced to act meaningfully and swiftly. As we speak, it seems recovery is on its way, and barring few geographies and few sectors largely linked to service economy, most of the things are into normalization phase. As the vaccination drive starts and it gets entrenched into the economy, even these economies or geographies and these specific sectors are also expected to contribute to the growth normalization. Coming on the fiscal front, there was a general political consensus which was clearly visible in the response of fiscal was required, deeper and impactful. But unlike 2008, it is expected to stay longer this time around. Another important thing is that real effective interest rates this time are deep into negative zone, thus the debt sustainability is not being in question. Coming on the monetary side at the global level, not only central bankers push the price of the money down, they also increase their balance sheet and increase the quantity of money in an unprecedented manner. Just to give you a perspective, Z4 balance sheets were expanded from about $13 trillion at the start of 2019, and it is expected to increase to $29 trillion by end of December 2022. But I would say there was a clear shift on the way communication was made from central bankers. They not only committed with a large money, but also committed to stay accommodative with some glide path. Just to give an example, Fed committed itself that they will hold on rates for next 3 years, despite that over next 3 years, their longer run growth is expected to be higher than the longer rate of 1.8%. There was another big ideological shift from the policymakers. As you can see, that central bankers, by and large, they chose to monetize debt explicitly to support fiscal play. Resultantly, because of such bold moves, the results are already visible. Income levels of private balance sheets have not fallen as was anticipated at the start of pandemic. It is anticipated that today, US household is sitting on about a surplus of $1.4 trillion, and this number is slated to increase to $2 trillion as the new fiscal comes into play. Even the private companies' bankruptcies this time around are a lot lower. It may sound contentious, but crisis has been used as an opportunity by the policymakers not only to heal the economy, but also to create higher potential in the economy than a pre-pandemic level. However, as a cost to all these, markets have already started pricing inflation to come back a lot higher and stronger. We differ with the markets on the inflation trend to some extent. First of all, central bankers have communicated that they would be tolerating the inflation because they think it could be temporary in the nature for some time. Then we think markets are overpricing the inflation comeback. Large part of the inflation is still in financial assets, which do have some bit of a wealth effect, but it takes time to come to the income effect over a period of time. Further, productivity gains led by technology and globalization, they are still in play. There is a slack in the economy, which is clearly visible in the services sector. But most important reason that we would say is that wage seekers, they still on a weak footing, given the unionization of these labors have been on the downside. As you can see, the data on the inflation is still not contained. Having said that, we need to be watchful of China as far as the good inflation is concerned. As we all know, that as we speak, most of the ferrous and non-ferrous metals, they are already at 5 to 7 year high. Having said that, incrementally credit impulse in the China have started slowing. Just for for the number perspective, incremental loan in China in January has fallen to about 7.4% from 10% in December of 2020. Let's quickly come to the Indian macro. At the start of this fiscal, there was a consensus estimate that Indian economy will degrow by about 11 to 13%. Most of these estimates are now between 7 to 8% of degrowth. However, we beg to differ because we think from the inception only that Indian GDP will degrow by in the range of 5 to 6%. Coming on to the next year, which is FY22, RBI projects that in FY22, Indian GDP will grow at about 10.5%, and most of the economists on the street, they are expecting growth of about 10 to 12%. Our expectation is that in FY22, we will be growing at the rate of about 13% with some upside risk. This difference is on account of our assessment of COVID impact on the economy, pace of normalization of economic activity, lag impact of RBI easing, which they have done over the last 12 months, and series of steps that our government has taken to arrest the slowdown, most important, budget. As you can see on your screens, these are set of 30-35 indicators that we look to track the economy. They did slump in H1, but the clawback has been even more swift. But what it is more looking like is that this clawback is just not pent-up demand, but a durable increase in demand. It may sound a bit speculative, but our understanding is that Indian GDP, even post-2022, will be growing at a higher rate than what they used to grow at a pre-pandemic level. Let's understand some of the reasons why. First of all, pandemic impact on the local growth has been somewhat weak. It seems that the antibodies were already in place at a substantial level. Even when the vaccination at the local levels starts percolating into the economy, some of the sectors which are still struggling, specifically related to the services, they will also start making impact on the economic growth. Second, of course, in last 12 months, RBI has done an exceptional job by cutting rates very sharply. Not only they cut rate, but they also increased quantitative easing by increasing their balance sheet from 43 odd lakh crore at the start of calendar year 2019 to about 57 odd lakh crore as we speak today. This assumed even greater significance given that the fiscal was absent in calendar year 2020. As we speak, liquidity is abundant, banks are parking money, and systemic liquidity is about 8 lakh crores. And it is expected to remain to the system for rest of the calendar year in 2021. Third, as far as real rates are concerned, post 2013, economy was exposed to a very high real rates. And these rates were exposed not only on the higher side, but they were given all of a sudden. Given that call has been undone now, we see the impact of them on the lending rates too, where we expect now that both nominal and real rates on the lending side will come off. This has a significant importance as far as the industrial activity is concerned. As you can see in these graphs, industrial credit as a part of total food credit in the banking system, non-food credit in the banking system, it has moved from 45% in 2013 to about 30% as we speak today. We understand that this slowdown in the industrial credit happened because of the high real rate that these industries were exposed to, lack of capital, specifically at a PSU bank level, and series of reforms which were undertaken by the current government, which are usually painful in the short term. As we speak, PSU banks are out of PCA framework. Most of the real rate unwinding has already been done, and as we speak, PSU banks and all large private sector banks, they are sitting on more than 80% of provision coverage ratios on their balance sheets. This should free up large amount of capital going incrementally. As the data suggests, even on the COVID provisioning could be a lot lower than what was feared at the inception of the crisis. Thus, we think that the slowdown on the industrial economy is almost over. Coming on the capex side, just to give you a perspective again, as far as gross fixed capital formation is concerned, it has slowed from 39% in FY12 to about 31% in FY19. Large part of this slowdown has happened because of slowdown in the household capex, which has slowed from 16% to about 11% in the same period. With the lower real rates, banking clean balance sheets, ready to lend, abundant liquidity, affordable housing prices because they have stayed stagnant in last 5-7 years, and better income levels, we think this could be the next driver of growth over next 5 to 10 years. As far as whatever we can say and sound as far on the Indian economy, but the matter of the fact is that it is one of the most stable growth stories so far. And the real reason is that 60 to 65% of the economy is still driven by consumption. As Sanjeev also highlighted in the previous session, that in As far as China is concerned, they will be declining from here, and Indian demographic peak is at least 20 years away. So we think this is the real reason that why the Indian economic growth could be a lot more stable going ahead. The most important reason why we are more bullish post 2022 is that because of the structural reforms that government has taken in last 15 months to take some serial supply side reforms and augment potential long-term growth. Our taxes has been brought down and they are much more competitive now, and incrementally through measures like PLI, tariff protections, and some bit of currency intervention to keep rupee competitive, these are clearly turning out to be a protectionist government for the local manufacturing. Thus, with all these reforms and measures, this has clearly improved the qualitative aspect on local balance sheets, and this should lead to large amount of risk capital inflow into the country. Talking of risk capital, dollar is most important source of risk capital. As we speak, dollar is expected to remain on the weaker footing because of the delta in the fiscal and monetary front that the US authorities have done. Even on the current account deficit, they are running pretty large. And as of yesterday, when the number was published, they are running a current account deficit of about $69 billion. This is one of the highest current account deficit that they have run. Thus, dollar looks relatively expensive on the valuation front. On the overall liquidity perspective, as of now, world is currently dealing with the excess dollars. Given the emerging market exposure is relatively low, and most of this is being invested into the bond funds, which are either have a nominal yield or negative, or a real yield for sure negative. It's a good news for emerging markets for medium term. In FY21, we would be printing about $100 billion surplus. We think that even in FY22, this number would be in the range of $70 billion with some upside potential. As a matter of fact, we are now fourth largest holder of reserves with headline reserves of about $590 billion and another $40 billion waiting in pipeline through the forwards intervention that RBI has done over last 6 months. This is one of the stable reserves currency and give a potential of a strong external balances and help Indian authorities both on fiscal and monetary front to take some bold measures to take our growth path ahead over what they used to be at a pre-pandemic level. Coming to the inflation side, as far as inflation is concerned, like global concerns, there are some concerns on the local inflation too. But we are much more confident on the local inflation. On the headline inflation basis, we think unlike 2020, 2021 will be a year of a much stable numbers in the range of 4.5% to 5%. Food inflation is likely to settle significantly lower than 2020 as the supply disruptions on account of COVID normalize. On the core side, there are forces on the both sides as the growth normalization picks in. But it is evident that there is a slack in the economy, especially in the services sector, and even the future inflation expectations have also started settling lower. On the good side, capacity utilization, they are still at 63%, and weight of commodities, excluding gold, silver, and oil, in these CPI is just about 6%. On the crude front too, our pass-through has been more than what justified. More important, the impact of crude oil on our economy is just 2.3% now. This number is used to be just double between 2008 to 2015. Thus, we think inflation is likely to remain stable and within the RBI mandate. Coming to the budget, but before we get into the specifics, we also need to understand in what context budget was framed. Globally, fiscal policies were unleashed in entire calendar year of 2020 to arrest the slowdown. Our policymakers, they made it clear at the inception only that they want to use this space when they were too confident that the pandemic impact is behind us and the fiscal impact would be maximum. We said that there were few backdrops which were the outliner or themes which were visible in this budget. First of all, there was a counter-cyclical measures and which was need of it to complement the slowdown in the private balance sheet. Second, our debt issues over many years have been somewhat exaggerated. As you can see in these charts, we are one of the lowest debt country in the total debt percentage in OECDs in the world. Our government debt is somewhat higher, but there is still at a median levels and large part of it is internal. Thus, it can be managed very effectively. Third, as far as government debt is concerned, large part of this debt is a legacy issue which we have acquired in 1980s and 90s when we chose to run fiscal deficit in the range of 6 to 8%. Fourth, given that clearly nothing much was left for the government of the day to spend where they actually want to spend from the reform perspective. As a matter of fact, even for the next year, 30% of total government spending is just going to meet out the interest expenditure. Thus, there was need to change these paths. With these backdrops, this budget seems to have shifted many ideological biasness. First of all, we have used the counter-cyclical measures and decided to spend when the output gap was very evident. They have used this space not only in this year, but also till 2026. Clearly, the window has been used to clean up some of the past acts and to create space for future too. Another important shift in these budget numbers was there was no tinkering in taxes. This gives a great communication about the stability of regime ahead. Let's come to the specific part. Again, there was some bit of ideological shift here. Unlike in every budget, where most of the estimates were on optimistic side, and post-budget presentation for the entire year, policymakers were running right, left, and center to meet out those estimates, and economists and market participants were running entire year to understand whether these numbers are manageable or not. Unlike those trends, this time the budget has turned out to be a lot more conservative. Just to give you a feeler, this year, for the 9th month, in the total gross receipts of the government has fallen by about 3.2%. But for the full year, they have assumed these numbers to degrow at 5.5%. It sounds puzzling to me. Nominal GDP they have assumed at 14.5%. As far as GDP is concerned, our expectation is that it will grow at 13% plus in the real term itself. Even if we assume market consensus of 10 to 12% of real GDP and about 4 to 5% of interest rates, ideally nominal GDP could have been in the range of 16 to 18% quite easily. As for on the receipt side, if you look into the numbers, the tax buoyancy has been assumed lesser than what it used to be pre-pandemic. Thus, we think there is a clear buffer of about 1.5 trillion to about 2 trillion of rupees, which can be used to meet future shocks in the next year or augment the expenditure side. Coming on the expenditure side, again, expenditure growth has been taken higher at 14%, which is evident in the fiscal deficit numbers. And this number used to be about 13% in the pandemic year. But most of this expenditure has been utilized to meet capex or clean up the past effects, which is both of them are likely to be non-inflationary in the nature. Capex has gone up, as you can see in these charts, from 1.7% of GDP to about 2.5% of GDP. This number is highest in last 7 years. As per RBI estimates, revenue expenditure has a multiplier of about 0.45x and capital expenditure has a multiplier effect of about 3.25x on the GDP. X subsidy, if you look at the revenue expenditure, is very close to pre-pandemic level. Thus, we can conclude that this budget is expansionary in the nature, but unlikely to be a major inflationary one. Having said that, there are problems of overall public debt, and this budget has exposed them further. Historically, if you look at the demand-supply numbers, about 40% of total supply is bought by banks to meet their SLR and investment needs. About 30% of the supply in dated securities is bought by insurance and PFs to meet out their ALM needs, and about 15 to 20% is bought by RBI to create money supply. RBI did a good job by cutting rates aggressively and increasing their balance sheet from 43 odd lakh crore to 57 odd lakh crore. But as a matter of fact, large part of this balance sheet expansion was done through FX assets and LTRO money, which are having a lower duration. RBI holding of GSEC, which used to be about closer to 28% of their total assets in 2013 and 15, has now drifted lower to about just 22%. When most of the central bankers last year have chosen to use their balance sheet to monetize the debt and support fiscal play, RBI clearly shied away. Even on the bank sides, it's very clear that the effective supply is now coming almost double than what they used to be about 4 to 5 years back. Natural causality of this operation has been seen on the bonds market, which are in the form of high risk-free rate and a steep term premiums. It may be noted that although inflation has settled from a pre-2013 level of about 7% to close to 4.5%, nominal yield in India, at least on the 10-year GSEC, has settled just from 7%, and they are struggling at about 6%. Clearly, real yields in the longer side of the curves, they are gone steeper than what they used to be in a pre-pandemic or pre-2013 era. This is what is creating some bit of a term premium issue and a crowding out effect on the economic side. Something on the policy front. Of course, RBI did disappointed markets when they didn't announce OMO calendar in the last monetary policy, but our understanding is that there was clear hints by the RBI to soothe the market nerves. First of all, RBI clarified that as far as the VRR action was concerned, market is misreading that RBI is trying to reverse its accommodative stance. Second, RBI cleared that evolution of yield curve is regarded as a public good. We understand that this is one of the most potent statements RBI might have ever made in any monetary policy in history. On the borrowing programs, RBI wanted a cooperative approach between markets and market players and RBI. As far as CRR hike is concerned, RBI promised that it will be replaced with a durable measures to add liquidity. Even in the post-policy conference call, Dr. Patra clarified to the market that any removal of extraordinary accommodation will be happen in a calibrated manner and after taking into account market reaction at a very stage. Given that we are in a strong, stable growth and inflation outlook ahead, it seems that India is turning to be into a Goldilocks situations. Our sense is that RBI is struggling with some sort of impossible trinity between flows, FX levels, and rates. Being stable currencies and high real yields in the long term, we are expected to receive large amount of capital flows into the country. And because of potential new industrial policy, RBI will try to make sure that rupee remains somewhat overvalued. Thus, either RBI needs to give up on short-term rates or they need to ready to bear the cost of such kind of heavy interventions. Having said that, we don't think RBI will like to be the flag bearer of normalization path in hurry given our macro variables are quite stable. We think reverse repo rate is likely to be the operative rate for next 12 months. Systemic liquidity, which is currently about $8.5 trillion, is likely to stay around these levels again for next 12 months. But as far as normalization of policy corridor between repo and reverse repo is concerned, we think in second half of current calendar year, they may start tinkering with it. Repo rate hikes are clearly a story of 2022 and 2023. But what RBI clearly need to jump upon is they need to take upon path to take out duration from the markets and address demand supply gap which has been evolved because of the aggressive fiscal play which has been unleashed on the market now. Having said that, markets are now trying to run ahead of RBI. If you bootstrap these OS curves, they are clearly indicating that markets are now pricing about 75 basis of rate hike of operative rate hike over next 12 months and about 150 basis of rate hikes in next 2 years. Given that RBI has indicated that they want to move in a calibrated manner and with proper telegraphed manner, do we think that markets are running ahead of RBI path or potential path? Even on the corporate sides, their curves looks extremely extreme. As you can see in these graphs, NABARD, which is a AAA issuance, their 2-year levels are at 5.15 and 10-year levels are at 7%. Clearly, 1x2 and 5x10 spreads are untenable. If you go by these numbers, markets is pricing that NABARD, which is trading at about 4.3% today, it is likely to go at the rate of 6% 1 year down the line, which looks somewhat unrealistic to us. Coming on the steepness of the curve, these curves steepness, they are in the shorter end of the curve has evolved, and we think that they give a reasonable protection and opportunity from the what RBI has been trying to normalize path. At the 2-year curves are already steep at 85 basis points and 1x3 curves, they are steep at 115 basis points. And clearly, they are giving reasonable protection and steepness for the investors to invest in these funds. This steepness that you have seen in the curve is almost near to record highs and significantly higher than the long-term average that we have seen. We think these are good opportunities for the investors to move money on these parts of the curve and gain benefits from the term premiums which are steep and which is unlikely to figure out or unlikely to fructify as RBI starts, even if RBI starts their normalization path. Coming on the credit spreads, of course, most of the credit spreads, they have normalized. We did saw a large part of credit spread expansion post IL&FS fiasco and in run-up to the Templeton saga. But now, given that most of these spreads, they are trading at near to their historical levels, we think it's better to stay neutral on these spreads incrementally. Now, coming to one of the most important question of this session, which is that with a big growth and expectation from the RBI to start normalization path later on this year, is fixed income a space or a safer space for the investors or not? There is least doubt that the path of least resistance for the rate is to go higher. But our sense is that given the intent that RBI has shown in the last policy, that there will be any normalization path will be well telegraphed and it will be in calibrated manner. Clearly, big duration gains are behind us and there are forces on both sides to push and pull rates. Having said that, liquidity is in abundance, and over next 12 months, we still think reverse repo will remain operative rate. Having said that, again, from the longer end perspectives, curves are in the curves on real yields, they are generally higher than what they used to be in a pre-pandemic period. Curves have clearly become steeper, and there is adequate compensation for the associated walls that anyone want to invest. Thus, any extreme moves on either side need to be used opportunistically while allocating satellite part of the portfolio. But the core part of the portfolio is concerned, they are better off by investing in 1 to 2 year paper because of the steepness and the compensation which is being offered. Again, there is some perceptions in the investor community that to exit all kind of durations when RBI starts policy normalization from the accommodative stance. We tend to disagree here. First of all, markets are already pricing more than what RBI is probably going to do. And the shorter end of the curve is too steep, an opportunity to be left for investing in these liquid funds. Thus, they need to be seen as a yield maximization strategy now rather than a capital gain perspective. Another important point that I would like to highlight here is that as far as long-term investors are concerned, these funds that we manage, by and large, they tend to benefit as the rate hardens. Let me explain. Now, most of the investors that do come from the long-term perspective, they buy us for a 3-year horizon. But such portfolios are usually having a duration of about 1 to 2 years. Thus, effectively, we run kind of a negative duration from an ALM perspective. As far as portfolio construction is concerned, there are reasonable laddered investments which are generally comes for reinvestment. Given with the gradual increase in rates, they are usually invested at a better reinvestment level. Thus, our advice to the investor is that if you are having a reasonable time frame to stay in the funds, the poop in rates should be used as an opportunity and as a better alternative to the liquid fund for sure. Over next year, the play in fixed income is a pure accrual play, but we need to ride volatility along this path. So I'll pause here, and if there are any questions, probably we can take them.
Right. Kaustubh, thanks a lot for that very insightful presentation for us. I have a couple of questions. Looking at the contents of the presentation, just wanted to understand from you on the growth front first. The way Indian growth actually, did not really collapse. It did collapse, but the equally sharp was the rebound. What, to your mind, was the reason for the resilience of growth here in India, even in such a pandemic kind of a situation?
Okay, look, our assessment is that, first of all, the COVID impact on the real economy was a lot lesser, and normalization path has been quite swifter. But more important, there is a little bit of an accounting path on this, because of which the growth has been the degrowth has been lesser than what was anticipated initially. Let me just explain. As far as accounting part is concerned, there are 3 large balance sheets which comes into the play into the economy. First is the government, then there is a private balance sheet, and then rest of the world. Because of the slowdown, as far as private balance sheet was concerned, they did have deep slowdown impact. But at the same time, from the government side, they chose to increase their fiscal deficit from 3.5% to about 9.5%. So there was a 6% delta on a positive side to growth, which was contributed from the government. Even on the rest of the world, from a CAD of about 1.5% of GDP, this year we would be printing about 0 to 0.5% of current account surplus. So this combo of government and rest of the world, they give some bit of healer to rest of the segments of the economy, which was the private balance sheet of about 8%, and which is why the growth slowdown in the country has been a lot lower than what was envisaged at the inception of the pandemic. Along with that, one can argue that because of the timely and swift response by the RBI and some kind of a mini budgets that government keep on putting over this period of pandemic, they did have some bit of positive response, and which is why growth in this year is likely to be in the range of 5 to 6% of degrowth, unlike of what was originally feared.
Kaustubh, the way yields have really been moving lately is making some fixed income investors nervous. From here on, the way yields actually moved after budget, etc., and then RBI had to step in, what's the outlook on fixed income, say, over the 12-month horizon from here?
Look, markets were clearly disappointed when the numbers in the budget on the gross borrowings came in, but one need to understand that these numbers were a bit conservative. In the short term, because of this technological, or I would say, because of this demand-supply mismatch, what led to the yields went higher. But clearly, when M3 is growing at about 13% you just can't supply fiscal or sovereign additional borrowing of about 100% what the market is used to be. So there was some dislocation in the curves which are clearly visible by taking rates higher, both at the shorter end and the longer end. But that's where the role of central bankers came in. Most of the central bankers globally, they have chosen to monetize debt and take out the duration from the market, and RBI clearly shied away from those things. But thankfully, in the policy which came after the budget, RBI not only talked dovish, but they are now saying that these yield curves, they are for public good. Our sense is that RBI will incrementally need to do more walk than talk as far as this demand-supply mismatch is concerned. And as RBI increases their talks, increasing their walks, they are likely to settle significantly lower than where they are today.
Kaustubh, we also see in the last few weeks, almost every company has been raising their prices, steel, cement, FMCG, all of them, as if, it's a return of inflation. And if it does happen, how does it really impact the fixed income investing environment?
So, look, of course, inflation as far as inflation is concerned, as we just discussed, as far as the food inflation is concerned, which contributes large part of our consumption basket, they will for sure settle much lower than what we have experienced in 2020. On the core side, look, the weightage of most of these inflation, which has come because of reset in the commodity prices, which means that these commodity inflation, excluding oil, gold and silver, is just about 6% in our basket. Even for the oil, as we just saw in one of the chart, that overall oil bill impact is just 2.3% of our GDP. Now, there are flex in the economy which is available, as evident, specifically in the services sector. And as far as government spending is concerned, it seems that most of the spending is unlikely to push inflation in the short term. For sure, because of the various steps that the government has taken in last 15 months, there is clear supply augmentation, which will make sure that the inflation on these numbers or the inflationary impact of these growth normalization could be a lot more muted than what is being believed or turning out to be in most of these commentaries. Again, on the company's number that we just spoke about, as you can see, large part of these EBITDA growth is also on account of the cost optimization rather than just pure profiteering. So what one need to be watchful on these inflation numbers, but our sense is that still, as far as the growth normalization path is concerned, it is not that this will lead to a significant increase in inflationary expectations from here on.
And lastly, Kaustubh, as a house view, what would your advice be for investors who are looking 1 to 2 year far out for fixed income?
Look, of course, there are pulls and pushes on the both sides, but on the shorter end of the curve, there are mismatches. These, even for push and pull mismatches on the shorter end of the curve, are a lot more balanced because the supply on the shorter end of the curve is a lot more muted as compared to the longer end of the curve. Given that the liquidity is surplus and it is likely to remain in abundance for rest of the calendar year, given that the RBI has committed itself that they will move in a very calibrated manner, maybe more telegraphed manner, it seems market has gone too ahead on the normalization path while pricing these curves. So we clearly see that the shorter end of the curve, which is basically 1 to 2 year bonds and probably 3 year bonds, they are an opportunity for the fixed income investors, but not only as an accrual, but also some bit as a capital gains, which could come in over next 6 months. But what you clearly need to, as an investor, is that you need to walk out of overnight funds and liquid funds because they will be aligning very closely where the reverse repo is, and it is likely to stay for the rest of the year. So there is an opportunity cost to stay in these funds. That I would say that given there is an opportunity cost, and given that the accrual and normalization path, what RBI is indicating or hinting us, these funds which invest in 1 to 2 year time frames, they are a good accrual play, even adjusting for the walls which is on the line which could come in. On the longer end of the curve, valuation looks very reasonable. India is one of the few countries which is still offering a positive real rates on the longer end of the curve, but you need to have a reasonable large time frame, which is more than a year to, or rather more than a 3 year to play these high real yields.
Right. Right, Kaustubh, thank you very much for answering those queries and for giving your presentation on the fixed income outlook.